I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. I know we're going to have people that are going to be joining us as we're doing this, but we do only have a short amount of time with everybody. So I do want to just go ahead and welcome everybody here. Thanks for joining us for this evening's, what I guess we're calling part 2 of our town hall to discuss the proposed changes to the special education services. For those that don't know me, I'm Brooke Lovelace. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa Developmental Disabilities Council. We want to thank Department of Education Director Snow and Department of Health and Human Services Director Garcia for joining us this evening and providing a little bit of detail about the proposed changes. We're going to get started here in just a bit, but I do want to lay out some ground rules. We had over 500 people register for this, so that's great. That's a great turnout. You can tell people are really engaged and really passionate about special education in Iowa and helping our students with disabilities. So great turnout, but that's obviously going to make it hard for everybody to have their voices heard. So just a little bit, we did have this as the invitation only till 7 o'clock, but we are able to stay on till 7:30 today. So if you're able to stay on with us for 90 minutes, feel free to do so. We do have a hard stop though at 7:30, and we do lose our interpreter right then. So we will be shutting it down at 7:30 today. We are first going to hear from Director Snow and Director Garcia, and then we are going to open it up for public comment and questions. But to really make this run as smoothly as we can, we want to ask if you want to make a public comment live. So if you want to unmute yourself and make your comment out loud, we ask that you put your name in the chat, and then I will call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and make your comment. If it is a comment that's already been heard, please try not to repeat comments so we can get as many voices heard today as possible. And then if you actually have a question that you want to ask the directors, please type out your question in the question and answer tab, and you can find that in the More section on the bottom of your screen. The directors did still want this to be more of a listening session. So we are going to allow for people we're going to go kind of 2 comments, 1 question, 2 comments, 1 question, if that makes sense, and I'll be kind of guiding that. So again, put your name in the chat if you want to make a comment out loud. And then if you have a question, put that in the Q&A. We are going to hold all comments and questions to 2 minutes. And Carlin, our public policy manager, has actually agreed to be kind of the timekeeper for that. I know that's not a pleasant job because she has to cut people off. And so you can, if you're be upset with me for asking her to do that instead of Carlin. We do ask that you please be respectful with all of your comments. We know people are really passionate about this, but we're really just here to try and make this a better system. Do please stay on mute until your name is called on. We will be recording this and sending out the recording along with all of the comments. So all of that information will be out to you guys and to people that couldn't attend. So you can share that with others that might not have been on here. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Director Snow.
Thank you so much, and good evening. This is Mackenzie Snow, Director of the Iowa Department of Education. And we so appreciate the opportunity to be with the DD Council again to continue our conversation about how Iowa can best meet the needs of students with disabilities across the state. And I know that's the North Star for each of us here tonight, so thank you. We're grateful for the important feedback that we received during the town hall last month, and also during dozens of roundtables and listening sessions across the state and throughout the legislative process. So again, thank you for sharing your time and your insights with us here tonight. We've had the opportunity to meet twice with the DD Council recently, and in those conversations, we've heard comments like, wow, that's the first time I've heard that. So we are excited to take up the DD Council's offer to again engage statewide in a second town hall conversation about how Iowa can best meet the needs of students with disabilities across the state. But before we jump in, I also want to introduce the awesome team of Department of Education experts here with us on the town hall tonight. We have State Special Education Director, Dr. Barb Guy, if you'd wave, Barb. We have General Counsel Thomas Mays, and we have Data and Analysis Bureau Chief Jay Pennington. So to frame our continued conversation, I want to start by sharing the executive branch's top goals or priorities for special education systems alignment. And the first of those is, of course, to improve the quality and the intensity of the services and supports that are provided to students with disabilities by ensuring integration of student identification and eligibility with services and supports with specially designed instruction to ensure access to the general curriculum and to meet other student needs. And the current system in areas has those components siloed. So identification and eligibility and services and supports are, of course, provided by the AEA system, and then especially designed instruction, the school district system. But those components must be deeply integrated to best serve students together in partnership between AEAs and school districts. The second top priority has been around targeting resources to providing services to students with disabilities. And that's achieved by a couple of functions. The first is reviewing and revising the AEA accreditation standards. And those are the standards in state code by which the State Board of Education ultimately accredits AEAs. And there are 10 accreditation standards in code, but only one of those 10 is focused on our core mission of serving students with disabilities. So ensuring that those are appropriately reflecting the mission of AEAs to best serve students with disabilities, in addition to those other important accreditation standards. And then the second main function is by updating the budget review process. And that's a process that currently exists in law and practice, but to ensure that there's sufficient levels of detail in the budgets that are reviewed and ultimately approved by the State Board of Education. And that includes staffing plans, because the majority of every AEA budget is, of course, personnel, and to ensure that those budget commitments are matching priorities, and that chief priority is, of course, best serving students with disabilities. I also want to just briefly address a misperception regarding funding I've heard a couple times. And just to be clear, at no point in time was it ever proposed to take a single dollar away from special education. The conversation has been and remains about ensuring that resources are targeted to what has the greatest impact on the learning and the success of all students with disabilities across Iowa. And oftentimes that's the classroom, and that's direct services and supports to students with disabilities. And then the final goal, as we heard from you in January, we too believe that decisions are best made by those closest to students with disabilities and their families. So the third goal is to ensure that we're best respecting local control by ensuring that AEAs are accountable to school districts, to superintendents, and of course to locally elected school boards. So those again are our top priorities. I also want to frame up two major statewide concerns that are important as we engage in this continued conversation. The first is student outcome data, and the second is the capacity of systems to serve students consistent with state and federal law, and of course consistent with best practices. So Jay, thank you. So Jay, if you could please pull up the slide deck. So we're going to start with student achievement data, because I know that there were a number of questions regarding student achievement data in our last conversation. And we've heard, of course, a lot about NAEP, but we want to start by focusing on ISASP, which is the State Summative Assessment. It stands for the Iowa Statewide Assessment of Student Progress. And that data shows significant and concerning achievement gaps experienced by students with disabilities. For reference, we've also had similar presentations with superintendents and AEAs across the state at their regional in-person superintendents and AEA meetings. But if we could jump forward to the ELA results. So I know that this looks like a busy slide, but it's got critically important information on it. So it includes assessment data over 4 years of the administration of ISASP. That's the number of times ISASP has been administered. And it articulates the achievement gaps across each years of that administration in each grade of students tested. And it shows that students with disabilities in English language arts, or ELA, experienced about a 40 to a 50 percentage point achievement gap. And that achievement gap actually grew as students continued to progress in school. So for background, that's about 3 times the achievement gap that's experienced by students who are from low-income backgrounds or students with low-income backgrounds. And if you could jump forward, Jay, and that's that reference point there. And then moving to math. So the achievement gap experienced by students with disabilities in math is 33 percentage points in grade 3 and 50 percentage points in grade 11. And like ELA, it grows, or English language arts, it grows as students continue in school. Another misconception has been around our achievement gap specifically concentrated on schools that are priority or schools that are, quote, low performing. And the answer is unequivocally no. So we see here that schools identified as priority or needs improvement, which are that light blue line, and schools that are identified as high performing or exceptional, that maroon line, indicate that the achievement gaps persist across all school types. So for ELA, it's still 30 to 55 percentage point gaps, achievement gap experienced by students with disabilities. And in fact, we actually see that the achievement gap is generally larger in higher performing schools. And if you'll just skip forward to math real quick, in a similar pattern here. So I know that this is a ton of data, but the bottom line that we want to ensure is taken away is that achievement gaps have been experienced across assessment administrations, across all grades, and also across all school types in our ISASP administration. And then moving forward to NAEP, in addition to our ISASP data, the NAEP, or the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as the nation's report card, also shows significant gaps in how Iowa students with disabilities are being served in comparison to other states. And for background, NAEP is considered the gold standard of assessment. It is the only apples to apples comparison across states. You've heard that, yes, NAEP does not test all students, but the test utilizes a representative random sampling of students to provide statistically valid and reliable results. And you'll see, Jay, if you move forward, that across the 2017, 2019, and 2022 NAEP cycles, Iowa students with disabilities ranked 30th or lower on 10 of 12 assessments. And you'll also see that Iowa students ranked 15th, for example, in the nation in grade 4 reading in 2022 for, quote, all students compared to all students. But Iowa students with disabilities ranked 40th in the nation compared to other students with disabilities across the nation in grade 4 reading in 2022. So again, a very clear articulation of those concerning achievement gaps. So let me pause, and Chief Pennington, is there anything that you'd like to add at this point?
No, I don't have anything else to add. I think you covered it really well. Just large and persistent achievement gaps over time is what we've seen in the state.
Thank you, Jay. So, and again, as Chief Pennington indicated, we're seeing state and national data set after data set indicating that students with disabilities in Iowa, as defined in federal law, deserve better, and we all want what's best for our students. So I also want to recognize that achievement data is not the only measure that matters to you, to your families, or to us at the department, but it is a measure of the health of our special education system as a system level. And the data shows that we have work to do in ensuring that we're providing every student with what they need to be successful. The other main component I wanted to touch base on is the capacity of systems. So to kick off with, specifically, we've received questions about the focus of NAEP, as we talked about, but it's important to note that Iowa has been designated by the U.S. Department of Education as, quote, in needs of assistance for 2 or more years, largely because of our NAEP scores. They're driving that federal designation as in needs of assistance for 2 or more years. And we first received this designation in 2018. And for background, there's 4 categories of the designation in which states currently fall. There's needs requirement, there's needs assistance for 1 year, there's needs assistance for 2 or more consecutive years, which is Iowa's designation, And then finally, there's needs intervention. And Iowa in these designations has had high scores in compliance, which we're proud of, but has had, again, very low scores in the results portion of the determination, namely driven by our NAEP results. And the U.S. Department of Education has issued multiple letters regarding this determination, and it articulates potential corrective actions, and those include things like directing the use of state level funds or requiring the state to work with appropriate entities. And I just also want to provide the frame that the U.S. Department of Education is conducting on-site monitoring of Iowa's state special education system in the fall of this year. Again, informed by that designation. So I also want to touch base on general supervision, and general supervision or assurance that due process procedures and all rights to which a student with a disability is entitled to under IDEA, including FAPE in the least restrictive environment, as well as best practices like the implementation of inclusion to the greatest extent possible in the academic setting, in the social setting, in the physical setting, and more are realized. And we've had the U.S. Department of Education inquire about how general supervision, all those components of general supervision are implemented under federal IDEA law. And currently, state law and rule both assign portions of the department's general supervision obligations to AEAs. And I just think this is a really important clarifying point. Federal law does and has always assigned the ultimate responsibility and accountability for general supervision to the Department of Education. So making clear that general supervision of special education is a DE responsibility or a Department of Education responsibility isn't an expansion of that role. It's just simply a recognition of the role that federal IDEA law assigns to the Department of Education and a clarification of those roles. So I just want to make sure that we're starting with that frame. I also want to share a little bit of background about the DE's role as it's been discussed in multiple legislative proposals. And the history here is that the department actually had a division of special education in the 80s. That division then became a bureau, and that bureau was then dissolved in 2012. It was not reformed until August of 2022. So we now have a Bureau of Special Education that Dr. Guy leads with 15 positions filled by team members that are of course, very dedicated to serving our 65,000 students with disabilities across 325 school districts. But the number of positions doesn't match the need and doesn't match the importance of these critical jobs. And that's why the General Assembly is considering restoring that division of special education with a majority of team members located in the field across the 9 AEA and superintendents regions. For a bit of background there. And Dr. Guy, is there anything that you would add to those components?
I think you've laid out the background pretty well. I look forward to the conversations and the input from groups. I think the only thing I would add is just to strengthen that your last comments about our desire at the Department of Education is to provide the kinds of supports and materials and resources to teachers, schools, so that our kids are getting the most effective, specially designed instruction possible.
Thank you, Dr. Guy. And then last point, I know that there's been a lot of conversation about limiting action to a potential study. And I know many of you on the town hall are familiar with the 2011 legislative task force. And that task force articulated many of the same concerns a decade ago that you just heard us cover again. And those concerns included focusing on narrowing and closing achievement gaps experienced by students with disabilities, a focus on core services to students with disabilities, a focus on parity or consistency of quality across AEAs, a focus on implementing greater statewide accountability and more. And General Counsel Mays, who's also on the town hall, can share additional background on the study throughout the conversation if there are questions. But I think it's important to frame this with the fact that we know that more than a decade has passed since that 2011 study. A child's entire K-12 experience has occurred, and there's been little to no action to address these identified concerns. And that's why it's so critical that we're engaging in this conversation and continuing to engage in this conversation tonight. We all want our children to have what they need to be successful, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to provide some background. Director Garcia and her team, as you saw, are also here this evening, which demonstrates our state level commitment to ensuring that our education and our health and human services systems are partnering to best serve children with disabilities across all environments. So before I pass it off to Director Garcia, again, I just want to thank you for your continued engagement. The unique expertise that everybody on this town hall brings is critical to the department. It's critical to best serving Iowa's children, and we just appreciate the opportunity to be here to listen to you. So thank you.
I think that's my cue. Thank you, Director Snow. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Garcia. I'm the director of the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services. With me here tonight, as Director Snow mentioned, I have, and I just lost her in my screen, but I have Liz. There she is. She's right underneath me now in the Brady Bunch squares. Liz Matney, who serves as our state Medicaid director and one of our 2 deputy directors in the agency. And right next to her on my screen, at least, is Director Ryan, who serves as our disability and aging director in our newly formed HHS structure. I'm going to keep things really short for the moment because the most important part of tonight is us hearing from you. But as Director Snow mentioned, I'm just really thankful for so many people, nearly 400 folks taking their evening. I even saw one woman who was ambitiously making dinner in her screen while listening. So I'm very much appreciating the thoughtful multitasking that's occurring tonight. I think there are no 2 places in government more important to be deeply connected than education and health and human services. And that has not always been the case in our state, that we have shown a deep commitment to those partnerships. But what I want you to hear from us today, and hopefully you see from our agency on a regular daily basis, is that we need you at the table as we think about how to strengthen our systems. And we have that deep commitment through our waiver redesign. We have that deep commitment as we think about launching navigation points over in Zach's division to help families navigate the array of services that are needed to support individuals with disabilities. But we equal parts have to have that with education. It is critically important for youth to have that space because it's more than just the caregivers who have joined us on this call. That space of coordination has to extend into the classroom and back home again. And so with that, I think we're ready to turn it to questions. And I just, again, am grateful for the time, the commitment, and all of the work that you've put into bettering educational efforts for our students with disabilities.
I think that's over to me. Right now, we've got some questions that are actually in the chat area, but we have tons of questions in the Q&A part. We don't have anybody that has come up that said that they wanted to make public comment yet. So Director Snow and Garcia, do you want me to start summarizing some of these questions? We have like 47 in the Q&A.
We are happy to kick off with questions, but again, we really want to be sure to use this opportunity to listen. So any prioritization for public comment and anybody
We do have some now. So Josh Beck, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, great, thank you. I just want to thank both of you for coming and talking, today and tonight, giving your background, your explanations. I appreciate that. Just a couple comments. I'm glad we're having the discussion now. I wish we were having this discussion before the bill was rolled out. I think there was a real lack of dialogue. I'm a person with a disability, and too often people with disabilities, they put baby in a corner, and it's patronizing to not have people come and say, what are your concerns? How can we best serve students? How can we help this community be productive people in our state? So I really wish this conversation would have happened a year ago, prior to the governor going to a out-of-state company to do a report. So that's my first issue. My second issue is that I have a very big concern about the fee for service for special education component. I'm not very clear on how what is being proposed is matching up to deal with the problems you've identified. So I'd be very interested, are there other states? What's the research? And that's why a task force would be helpful to make sure we're targeting solutions that match the problems. As a person with a disability, fee for service has big concerns. And I receive services from a vision itinerant. What if there's no vision itinerant in the area? All that's available is to contract to a company. The company's out of state. It's a telecompany. I personally can't imagine if I had to learn how to read Braille online. So that's a really big concern of mine. I have a really big concern that the governor's proposed bill would actually result in highly specialized individuals that would possibly lose their jobs or positions for out-of-state companies. And we keep hearing that it's going to not reserve in less funding for special education service, but it could be an adequate service, as I pointed out. So that's a really big concern. Is it going to be equal service? Is it going to provide a fair and appropriate education? And I don't know that online services will. So, thank you for being here. Thanks you. One last thing about the NAEP data. It's my understanding that there's some discussion on the website of that. I'm not a statistic person, but there's some discussion on that just states can exclude people from taking that exam for different reasons. So you have different pools of students taking that. So I'm not a data person, but I do, have some questions or concerns there about that data that we keep reciting. So thank you for listening. I hope you consider some of the comments tonight as you move forward. And it's too bad we couldn't have this conversation a year ago.
Thank you, Josh. I did skip over somebody that did put their name, and I apologize for that. And just to keep, I think I might have lost my timekeeper, but just to make sure that we keep it on 2 minutes. It looks like Kim Baldwin wants to make a public comment. Kim, do you want to unmute yourself? Kim, are you still with us? Not seeing that Kim is with us. We can go to Jessica Roman. Jessica, are you able to unmute yourself?
I am. Sorry, it took me a second to get there.
That's okay.
Hi, my name is Jessica Roman. I am a parent, and I am speaking as a family advocate as well this evening. As the previous speaker said, this conversation should have happened way before a bill was ever introduced. I have to say I'm disappointed that this conversation is starting with the same tired talking points that have been disproven and kind of plagued this process all along. The original bill that the governor presented was based off of an analysis provided by an out-of-state entity, Guidehouse. The data cited in that report, there's been a lot of holes poked in that by former Iowa DE directors and deputy directors who had a lot of experience in education and working in the educational system in Iowa. And at this point, not engaging in a comprehensive review of AEAs and special education practices, as well as those general education services in Iowa, is just irresponsible. And there is great potential for harm. Once we make major changes to what we have, there's no going back. And nor has there been any evidence provided that shows how these proposed changes will actually create positive outcomes for students. Director Snow, you stated that currently our services and systems need to be integrated, and I agree with you. I do disagree that our current system is siloed. And I am curious as to the information that you use to come to that conclusion. Currently when a child is suspected of having an educational disability in Iowa, since we are a non-categorical state, there is that data process that leads to that suspicion of disability. There is a team evaluation that includes a child's school, the appropriate AEA professionals, whether it be OT, PT, autism consultant, speech, and the child's family. At the conclusion of that process, the child's eligibility for special education is also determined through a team decision. All stakeholders for that child are at the table during that decision. If they're eligible, that specially designed instruction is provided in their classroom by their teachers, but it is supported by the educational consultants through the AEA that help support that teacher and also provide those other special education professionals. In no way, shape, or form.
I just have to cut you off there.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jessica.
Carlin. I didn't see that you were there. Thanks, Carolyn. So I know we were going to go to one question after that, but I believe Kim that we called on was able to unmute herself. Kim, did you want to go ahead? Kim Baldwin, did you want to go ahead and make your public comment? And the mute there is down there should be on the left-hand side for you. Okay, should we go to a question then? Director Snow and Director Garcia, are you okay with that? We have more people that want to do public comment. I'll leave that up to you.
I'm happy to jump in with a question. Thank you.
Okay. Let me get over to that. And we'll capture all of these questions. And so if your questions are not answered, we can definitely make sure that everybody has that. The first question that we have, and I'm just going to try and summarize this. OT, PTs, LSPs, and teachers frequently use those services. Do you suppose this will continue? How will it be funded, and who provides the oversight if not kept at the AEAs?
Thank you.
And go ahead.
No, please, sorry. I want to make sure I hear the full question.
Yeah, and will the AEAs be able to determine through the districts what our AT needs are and continue this very efficient system of checking out items for trial, data collection, and eventually for the LEA to purchase as the IEP team makes an informed decision?
Thank you. So I think just framing, and this has been a trend, I think, in some of the public comments and questions about the provision of services. And we've heard a number of examples of really high quality integration and provision of services. And we celebrate and we very much so appreciate hearing that feedback in those instances of excellence that occur across the state. We want to make sure that that is every child's experience. And the feedback that we've received across the state indicates that it's not every single child's experience. So by ensuring that we have consistency in quality and in the intensity of services and supports, we, especially through potentially revised accreditation standards that are specifically focused on special education, we can help ensure that that's an experience that all Iowa's children with disabilities and their families have. Barb, Dr. Guy, did you want to add anything to that specific question?
No, you've handled it well. Thank you.
And then, Brooke, if I may, I just want Jay to jump in real quick on the question about NAEP and the ability to, or the concern that some students are excluded from NAEP to clarify that misunderstanding.
NAEP does allow a little bit of exclusion, but the numbers are really low if you take a look at who. So like an example of an exclusion is a student that can take the dynamic learning maps or the assessment that's available for students, 1% of students with a disability. Those are counted as an automatic exclusion, and the student would not participate in the NAEP. But when you look at the rates of kids tested, every state has to meet the requirement as part of their agreement to participate in NAEP.
And Jay, can you talk a little bit about how schools are selected, if schools have the option to opt out, and how students are selected? Because what Jay referred to specifically was the dynamic learning maps, or DLM, which is the alternate assessment that only 1% of students with disabilities are able to take per federal law. So that's a very narrow scenario, and I just want to make sure you have the fuller picture.
So there's been a robust conversation about NAEP. NAEP, as Director Snow mentioned, is considered one of the gold standards in terms of how it's administered, the quality of the assessment, and in particular, the sampling. The sample is a stratified sample. So they're taking a look at, the overall population within a state. There's approximately 90 schools participate in every assessment administered every 2 years. That's about 3,000 kids across the state that are participating in each grade and content area, to be clear. So that stratified random sample ensures that the schools that are in the sample are representative of the state as a whole, that the student populations, whether it's students with disabilities or Hispanic students, are also assessed and representative of the percent of students in the population as a whole. And that's done very carefully to make sure that the results that we're all talking about now are valid and reliable.
Thank you,
So
Jay.
hopefully that covers it. Yeah.
Thank you. And Thomas, did you have anything to add?
A couple of things. I've been Thomas Mays, Department of Education, for those of you who I have not met yet. A couple of things regarding the discussion in the chat, the Q&A regarding NAEP. There are exclusions, but those exclusions apply to all states and territories. So it's not just unique to Iowa. It's an apples to apples comparison because every state operates under the same exclusion rules. Second, NAEP, there are some questions about its usefulness posed in the chat. What is most critical here is that the U.S. Department of Education uses it for making special education determinations. Director Snow is very clear about that. That is why we are in the situation we are in with the federal government. To ignore NAEP is to ignore the direction we receive from the U.S. Department of Education. And finally, the 2011 study relied heavily on NAEP data to show an achievement gap and to put forth a plan to address that. So like it or not, NAEP is woven through all of this, not putting all of our eggs in one basket, but still a very important part of the decision calculus. So thank you for allowing me to add some legal context to the actual people who know what they're talking about at the department.
Thank you, Thomas and Jay. And just to wrap this piece up, I know that it's a substantial conversation around NAEP, but we want to again, and there was a comment about the same talking points. These are not talking points. These are instances, the preponderance of evidence, data set after data set after data set, that indicate the health of the system and that we have gaps in how we are best serving students with disabilities across Iowa. So we would really love to shift and hope to shift from a conversation about the validity of the data, which has been utilized to inform decision-making over decades, to solutions orientation. So I appreciate just that frame of how we can address these concerning achievement gaps and narrow and close these achievement gaps throughout the conversation.
It starts with.
Oh, Brooke looks
I was
like.
on mute. Yep, we were back to public comment. Sorry about that. It looks like we are now at Melissa Phillips. If Melissa would like to come off mute and state your comment.
Hi, I wanted to say thank you for hosting this. As I know, This has been one of the most time spent concerns that we've been dealing with for the past couple of months. But my question is, as stated before by Director Snow, and I think as well as Governor Reynolds, there's been a growing concern of the achievement gap that continues to exist with students with disabilities compared to, and I quote, average peers. Could you further explain how dismantling AEAs who do not assign districts a curriculum or specific interventions and instruction to implement with children solves this concerning issue?
And may I jump in? I know that was a comment, but I'm happy to respond to the question. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. So I just want to make sure that we are ensuring that we're coming from the same starting place, which is the use of the term dismantling AEAs. And that has never been on the table. The AEAs are the regional delivery system of services and supports, and there was never an intent or a proposal that would result in the quote dismantling of AEAs. The intent, of course, as stated earlier, is to ensure that we have appropriately integrated identification and eligibility services and supports, and then specially designed instruction, and to ensure that those pieces are closely integrated, and specifically to ensure that we can clarify the general supervision responsibilities of the DE at the Department of Education, so that the department can focus on compliance, and so that AEAs, per the feedback that we've gotten, can focus on services and supports to students with disabilities across the state. So appreciate the question and comment and the opportunity to help provide additional context.
Next, we have Caleb Bonjour. Caleb, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. How's it going? All right. First off, I'm coming to you today as a superintendent of a small public school district here in Iowa, but also a parent of 3 kiddos that are currently navigating our state's education system. I feel like my dual role kind of provides a little bit of that unique perspective in regards to our educational landscape. So first off, I definitely want to acknowledge the efforts and the initiatives that the Department of Ed has been working to implement and working to address. Obviously, you know, anything that we can do to improve outcomes for any and all students in the state is a huge priority for us. Some areas of concern for me, Director Snow, you had mentioned that, you know, since 2011, which coincidentally happened to be the first year that I got into education here in the state of Iowa. Since then, you know, we have not seen much change. I would argue we have definitely seen some change. We've had 6 different directors in that time. And so my question would be, is this a result of the AEAs, you know, work of what they've been doing, what the school districts have been doing, or a direct correlation to lack of, you know, continual and consistent leadership at the top throughout our state, you know, providing a focus on various areas. We've had various initiatives that have gotten started and then petered out, you know, with the C4K initiative, various other initiatives that have happened as well. And then some of my other concerns would directly coincide with the rollout and things that the state has attempted to do throughout the years, whether it's a new system like Achieve that, you know, was supposed to have various timelines set to it and how we would roll those out as districts. And I know there's still parts of Achieve that aren't working, like the parent portal and stuff for some and things like that. And so I guess, you know, my concerns would be shifting something that has been working in a variety of ways for a variety of years, shifting a lot of that back over to the DE that may or may not have full capacity to be able to do that, especially with the continual revolving doors and stuff within some various positions at the DE, would be some big concerns of mine as a school leader when we've worked to get assistance and implementing different things that the DE has set out for us there. So with that being said, some things that I would definitely suggest and in agreement with others of, it definitely feels like this is a lot to put on and to work through right away when, you know,
Caleb, I need to cut you off there.
That's fine. Thank you.
Director Snow, did you want to comment at all, or should we move on to the next question?
I'm happy to, but I also just want to make sure that there's time for comment, and I don't want it to feel like it's going back and forth. I want to be able to have the opportunity to listen, but I do
Sure.
very much so appreciate the superintendent's point around wanting to ensure that the Department of Education has the capacity to best support school districts across the state and AEAs across the state in fully realizing IDA rights and best serving students with disabilities across the state. A couple components, of course, we see that those achievement gaps persist across more than a decade and actually have grown since the 2011 assessment throughout multiple administrations of a single assessment. And when we crosswalk multiple assessments, we also see that those achievement gaps grow over time. And then we've also seen the history of the capacity of the Department of Education, and in 2012, the dissolution of the Bureau of Special Education, and then just the recent reformation of that Bureau of Special Education in August of 2022. So we look forward to continuing to potentially building capacity in a potential division of special education, a restoration of that division of special education, so that we can really support school districts and AEAs and families and students in the way that we want to. So thank you so much for the feedback.
Brooke, if I might add in.
Yeah, I just
not
saw
to-
that. I'm sorry, Director
I'm
Garcia.
so
Yeah,
sorry,
please
Brooke.
go.
I wanted to comment because Caleb, I think your points are really well taken, and I've been here for 4 years, so I'm a little bit further down the road in the journey than Director Snow is. But I took over a department that was not known for great stability or transparency or making decisions with Iowans at the table. So I'm going to speak for myself here. And I think we can all agree that there's a desire here to do better and be better and learn. I certainly have worked with our team, as I mentioned, on Medicaid waiver redesign to be really intentional around that effort. And stability is needed. Absolutely, stability is needed. But when I think about and I reflect on what we hear in the listening sessions, for example, that Director Matney holds on a monthly basis for Medicaid members and individuals who utilize Medicaid services and their caregivers and loved ones, we hear consistently on that side that the space between the service array that we provide is either inadequate or not complementary in schools. And so from my perspective, honing in on, there's lots of different versions of this bill floating around right now, and there's a lot to sort through in terms of the detail. But one of the things that would really help me understand how we can best structure the complementary aspects of supporting individuals with disabilities at home and in school is to understand, like, what are the top things you don't want to be broken and what are the top things you want to see fixed? Because the pathway forward here is really, really key, right? I mean, that's the space that I think decision makers, who frankly aren't me or Mackenzie in this space, are going to need to contemplate, right? It's in the legislature's hands at the moment with the governor right seated at the head of the table. And so that's the space that I think is going to be most helpful. And I'm seeing a ton of comments in the chat. So with that, I think if we can frame up a few comments and or questions that are really focused on those spaces of improvement, that would be really helpful.
Thanks, Director Garcia. We do have another public comment by Carrie. I'm probably going to not pronounce your last name right, Carrie, but Carrie Schwem.
That's right, Carrie Schwem. Thank you. I'm Carrie Schwem. I've been an AEA speech language pathologist since 1997. I am concerned about the effectiveness, efficiency, and transparency of increased oversight and decision-making that would be made by an individual appointed by the governor, both now and in the future. I think the recent unilateral decision to end the Family Educator Partnership is one example. Director Snow, you earlier said decisions are best made by those closest to the students and their families. So I would like to know which students and families you talked to before you decided to end that program. I don't think the DE is equipped to successfully manage a statewide special education system. If these were concerns that were identified in the 2011 Legislative Task Force, I think I might hypothesize that the dissolvement of the Bureau of Special Education in 2012 might have been a factor into why those issues were not adequately addressed. The DE has worked with an out-of-state company for more than 5 years to develop the Achieve IEP system. We are 20 months after its release. The family portal is not operational. There are problems with archiving progress reports, and there's still problems with locating and saving documentation. Here are my other reasons for why this needs to slow down. Abe, Brevin, Milana, Jackson, Brecken, Braden, Savannah, Rowan, Jeffrey, Nathan, Riley, London, Relina, Johnny, John, Wilson, Faith, Jaden, Theo, Lachlan, Keziah, Natalia, Grayson, Jace, Moby, Abigail, Daniel, Brandon, Justin, Tatum, Grace, Isaac, Hunter, Macy, Ryan, Aaron, William, Jacob, and Therese. I see those smiles in my mind. Your role as a state leader is to help slow this down so the best decisions are made. You're right. We all want the best decisions for kids. And with all due respect, Mr. Mays, in one of your responses, you indicated a reference to actual people who know what they're talking about in the response to the NAEP questions. I believe we are people who know what we're talking about because we've been in the classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Our next person up for public comment is Stacy Ward. Stacy, are you still with us?
Yes. Now, I'm not sure how effective you'll be able to answer my question, but I am hoping that perhaps you will have some further insight into what it is I need to have found out. I'm a family advocate. I have a child that actually attends a special school in Black Hawk County. And my main question is, I know with the latest changes to, I believe it is the Senate file bill that's circulating right now, that there will be a task force that will be convening with results needing to be shared by the end of this year in 2024. And one of the areas that they need to be focusing on is operations of buildings and whether or not to still keep the buildings, have the Department of Administrative Services oversee the buildings, or sell the buildings. Because part of the file, and again, this is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the area education agencies cannot own property. And so one of the task force items to look at is to see what we will do with said properties that are currently owned by the AE now. So my main question is, what are your intentions with the River Hills school building? And that's basically what I would like to know. Is it going to be on the chopping block? What's going to happen with that building for these students?
Thank you. And I would, of course, refer questions about a specific legislative proposal to the General Assembly. I do believe that in those in the legislative proposal referenced, there is not provisions to remove the ability to own or operate buildings, but again, would refer that best to the members of the General Assembly.
Director Snow, we do have a couple of questions in the question and answer about child find and what happens to that and to the early access programs. Do you want to just respond on that? I don't think we've touched on that yet today. I apologize if we have.
No, thank you. And happy also to loop back to FEP if we have time. Just wanted to make sure that we were getting as much public comment in as possible. But specifically regarding early access and special education 0 to 3, it's important to clarify, and I know this has been a major point of confusion, but it's important to clarify that at no point in this conversation and in no legislative proposal was there ever a recommendation to move or change early access. Those funds always continued to flow directly to AEAs for provision of special education 0 to 3 and for provision of child find and early access. I know that's been a big point of confusion, so I appreciate the opportunity to help clarify.
Next, we have Heather Kruger. Heather, are you available to unmute and make public comment?
Yes, hi. Thanks you for having this town hall and thank you for being willing to take questions and comments. I've been a special ed teacher for 21 years and I've loved every moment of it. I've loved every kid that I've had. But I know that in different states, their special ed systems look different. So in some states, like our state, we identify a child who has a special need and then we dismiss them when they have met where their peers are. In other states, they don't do that. So you may have a child that needed a IEP in kindergarten, but was done with it by 3rd grade, and they don't remove kids from special ed. So they could be taking an honors class in their high school and still be considered a special ed student. So that could be people taking the NAEP test, and then that skews the results. Are we looking at, in Iowa, we have level 1, level 2, level 3. Are we looking to see if we're comparing our level 3 kids to level 1 in another state? And was it mandatory? Because I think there was 2 states that did not even participate. So that was a bit confusing and interesting for results to look into. Also, the fee for service, I'm concerned about because not my school district, but I know there are some school districts out there that they're going to find the cheapest person. And that's not necessarily the best quality. So we start having different quality between kids instead of everyone that's kind of been trained the same. Now we're going to have different qualities. Teleservices, it's not good. We learned that through COVID. It was terrible. It was a mess. And I'm sure we lost a lot of ground due to COVID. And teleservices are not going to fix that gap. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just a couple quick points of clarification. I think Barb, if you want to jump in here as well, there's been a significant confusion around Iowa's unique non-categorical system in serving students with disabilities, and that is unique from the nation, categorical versus non-categorical. And our identification process, as articulated by the U.S. Department of Education, does comply with federal law and the specific disability categories outlined in IDEA. And what differs is our ability to provide services and supports beyond a student's disability diagnosis. There's been a lot of conversation about the opportunity to continue to look at categorical versus non-categorical and if it's best serving students in the way intended. But I also want to provide Dr. Guy the opportunity to help clarify this point because it's been a common point of confusion.
Right. So thank you, Director Snow. I think the place where I'd like to start with that is to just remind everyone, or for those folks who've not been close to the concept of our identification process in Iowa, is we do follow the same process. We follow the 13 categories that are identified in IDEA. There are very specific criteria that are in there. Those are incorporated across our identification eligibility process. The difference is once a child is identified as having a disability and needing special education services, we qualify them as eligible and we don't assign a label. And what that provides is the opportunity to really look at what that individual needs rather than what a list of services that might be there for generic and not specific to the child. So that's where that started. And we've had numerous people, as Director Snow has mentioned, from the federal agencies looking as they've reviewed many states' eligibility process, and we are in compliance with that. I think the other thing that it must be 7 o'clock, the lights went off in the building, in the Grimes building. The other piece that I wanted to add is that we have looked at, well, before I go there, we know that other states, to be in compliance, need to exit a child when they no longer need special education services. So in those instances where somebody is staying and they no longer in a state, they would be out of compliance with federal law, just as we would be. The other piece would be that I wanted to add is that we have just done an analysis of the data of third graders for the last 2 years who exited special education and returned to general education. They, if their scores had kept or stayed with those students who were on IEPs, it only changed by as much. The most it changed was 2 percentage points. And if we want more details on that, we can toss it to Jay to describe that analysis a little bit more. Was there anything else, Director Snow, that you wanted me to address right now?
If I might jump in. I asked, and I stand by my position that I don't know what I'm talking about except for the statute. And right now, this is my area. I asked all of my job-alikes, all general counsels from every other state agency, if they allowed students to remain in special education with a label only. And every one of them said no, that children with disabilities in whatever state you are in still must demonstrate need for specially designed instruction. So it's a myth out there that children with disabilities in other states are kept on merely with a label. It's a label plus need, which is back to Director Snow and Dr. Guy's point, is our system, which complies with federal law. So thank you for allowing me to share my specialized knowledge and sort of the breadth of the 50-state survey that I was asked to do on that question.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in, Thomas, before we throw it back to Director Snow, and just add one more thing, which is, I have worked in other states. I taught in Kansas, I taught in North Dakota, and I have not taught in Iowa, but obviously I've worked for the department for 26 years and been in a lot of classrooms. I'd really like us to get focused on what happens in classrooms and not whether or not we've identified the right people for special education services. I serve at the pleasure of the legislature and you all. So we'll do what we need to do, but boy, my plea is, can we focus on good instructional practices and effective specially designed instruction and the resources and related supports and services that are effective.
Thank you both. And I think just one additional point, some of the feedback from superintendents in particular that we've received on categorical versus non-categorical is wanting to ensure that a school district has all the information about a student to best serve that student. And that's been, I just want to make sure that both sides of that conversation are represented here. And that's been the feedback that we've received. We started engaging this conversation about categorical and non-categorical 6+ months ago, in receiving feedback about this unique component of Iowa's special education system. And we just look forward to continuing that conversation and fully articulating the different benefits and potentially unintended consequences of it. I also just want to briefly address a couple of comments around like quote fee for service or concerns about providers that are not well connected to communities. So currently we have a system in which there's no ability to assign cost to services. There's no transparency in the cost of services and supports. And we've had multiple scenarios of folks pricing out potential services based on what their enrollment generates, what the students they are responsible for serving generates. And wanting to ensure that there is transparency and that there are meaningful conversations between superintendents and locally elected school boards and AEAs to ensure that we are providing the highest quality and the greatest possible intensity of services and supports to students with disabilities. It again goes back to our core principles, our goal for this conversation. And again, I just want to make sure we have that front of mind throughout.
Thanks, Director Snow. We now have Terrain. I hope I'm not really screwing up your name, but Terrain Butel.
Taryn Butel. It's a hard name.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No,
You're up.
I know it's a hard name. So just to give you a frame of reference for who I am, I was the parent of a child, I still am the parent of a child with disabilities who's now an adult, who decided at age 40 to go back to school and become a school psychologist so that I could advocate for children with disabilities and their families. I currently work for an AEA as a challenging behavior and autism specialist. I hope that that won't discredit anything I have to say in your minds, because I find these days if we work for the AEA, our motives are questioned. And I have a lot to say in 2 minutes, so I may not be as filtered and as gentle as I'd like to be, but I hope you'll give me some grace. So thank you for coming. There are a lot of impressive names here talking to us. It's nice to put faces to them, and I appreciate your time and your listening ear. I'm going to start by saying at this point, I think for the last 6 or 8 weeks, everyone's been bombarded with data and facts and pleas about discrediting the claims against the AEA. And I think it's become evident that this isn't really about that. This is really one more step in an effort to privatize our public education. And I'm frustrated. I don't know how to have a conversation because I think we're fighting a fight that isn't really what the fight is. It feels like a front. I think Carrie Schwemm addressed all my concerns about the Department of Ed beautifully, so I'm going to move past that. But I want to say that not all achievement can be measured by reading and math scores. Employers over the past decade or so have indicated that they value those, what we sometimes call soft skills, more than academic achievement, because if people don't have adequate interpersonal skills, adequate communication skills, they aren't able to be successful in the workplace. And sometimes the things that are perceived as inconsistencies or inequities across AEAs are in fact responses to needs and requests that are unique to a student or a district. Just a couple weeks ago, I was asked to talk to 4th graders in a small rural district. Happens to be a district Director Snow visited this year. I was asked to speak to this class about autism because they had a little boy in their class who didn't have a single friend. And he is high enough functioning that he cared about that. He was really hurt and he was being ostracized and at times bullied. And so I went in and I talked to those kids, and I took an ability approach, and I talked about different abilities and neurodivergence and how we're all different, and kind of asked for a commitment from the kids to give this little boy a chance. And later that day, the teacher called and said that for the first time ever, children had played with him on the playground. And I thought, okay, well, that was today because it was fresh in their minds. I was in the district 2 weeks later, just last week, providing training again in nonviolent crisis intervention. And another teacher caught me in the parking lot, and she said, I just wanted you to know what a difference you made for that little boy, because every day now, all day, he's engaged with his peers and he's laughing and smiling and he has friends, which means he has opportunities to grow his social skills and his confidence. And I don't know where his reading and math skills fall, but I'm going to tell you, being able to get along with other people is going to be a priceless skill for him in his life, regardless whether or not there's an achievement gap. And closing that gap is of course important, but that's maybe not the most important thing for guaranteeing his success. So I think we need to look at all aspects of children when we start talking about achievement and what AEAs can and can't do for kids. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing that, and so appreciate and respect the work you do with students and supporting positive behavior. So thank you.
Heather
Award
Sievers.
oh, I'm sorry, Brooke. I did it again.
No, go ahead, Kelly. Go ahead. Sorry.
Darren, you win the award for making me cry tonight. That was beautifully stated.
Heather Sievers, I think I've got you up next for public comment.
Yep, crying a little bit. Hold on a sec. I got the opportunity to talk to many of you yesterday. So, I mean, I second what everybody's saying. Thank you for creating this opportunity for people to share. You can tell there's a lot of fire and passion in the community. What I do want to bring forward is this, if you read the comments, if you hear what people are saying, this isn't about not working together. This isn't about improving achievement. I mean, this is about improving achievement, improving our systems, improving our structure. I think what our community is having a lot of trouble with right now is that even our legislators didn't know about the bill. We heard before the start of 2024 that there's going to be an audit, and find out that the audit was already done by an outside organization that doesn't have any connection to our kids or the services that we provide in the state. So that was the first thing. Of course, that's going to invoke fear. Can't blame our communities for feeling that way, especially for families. And I would say 80%, if not more, support our AEAs and feel like they're our family. So this has been really, really intense for a lot of people in the community. As a mother who has a child with rare disabilities, they've changed our lives, you know? So the reason you're getting such an outcry from the community is because, not because we don't want to engage. I actually truly believe that we should improve the relationship with the Department of Education. We should build out the Department of Education so it can serve our schools better. But I think what's actually happening here with these rapid bills is that you know, Director Snow, you talked about the fact that there is going to be potentially unanticipated consequences. That's what we're worried about. The speed of something like this. I work in transformation. That's like my professional life. I know what you have to put into transformation and doing it really well. And this honestly is moving so fast that there will be unintended consequences that ultimately are hurting our public schools and our most vulnerable populations. Like we're just asking for support and advocacy from everyone who is kind of in positions that are supposed to have the best interests of our families and kids in mind, to slow down and to get behind us and slowing down and doing this in a responsible manner. That's what we're asking. And I think you can see that from the comments. Thank you for giving the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I think it's clear that the common ground that we all share is our passion for best serving students with disabilities across the state. So thank you. I just want to clarify real quick. The unintended consequences was in reference to categorical versus non-categorical, not in reference to the legislative conversation that's occurring. So just appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. And again, appreciate your engagement and your passion. Thank you.
Up next, we have Mark Schneider for a public comment. Mark, can you unmute yourself?
I certainly can, Brooke. How you doing?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Good. I do want to thank Director Snow and Director Garcia for taking the time to listen to the comments tonight. I'm confused. I'm confused. You know, I've heard tonight since 2011, 2018, we're worried about the achievement gap. And I too am worried about the achievement gap. And I also know and agree with the comment that was made that our AEA accreditation reports need to look at more than just one standard. Currently, they have one standard for special education. And I agree there should be more than one standard. But as you know, Director Snow, every 5 years, a DE site visit team goes into each AEA and looks at I think there's 13 total standards, one of which is special education. They go in, they look at how the AEA is performing, they make recommendations on each of the standards, and they identify strengths. The last time this was done was in the 2021-22 school year. And in the fall then, the DE site visit teams make a recommendation to the director of whether the AEA should be accredited. And you can also tell by the report what they said about each standard. I went back and looked at those 2022 reports, and in the standard that deals with special education, all 9 AEAs have met the standard. And in 3 of the 9, there are no recommendations for improvement. So I guess I'm really confused. if we've had this concern since 2011, 2018 of the achievement gap, there actually have been 2 cycles of AEA site visit teams by the DE, and not once is it mentioned in any report. So I don't know if you can do anything tonight to help my confusion. But again, I just want to end by thanking you for at least taking the time to listen to people.
Thank you so much. And again, I do want to frame, as you referenced, there are currently 10 accreditation standards in code. One of those is focused on special education, and that's the one that you were referencing. Thank you. The legislative proposals look at expanding the accreditation standards to include that the program plans have to show progress towards the outcome and goals of students with disabilities. It adds achievement data of students with disabilities to ensure that there's data to inform decision-making. It adds a focus on direct services to students with disabilities. It adds support for effective instruction, or specially designed instruction for students with disabilities. And it also clarifies the roles and responsibilities around general supervision, which again is an authority and a responsibility that federal law assigns to the Department of Education. It also adds services and professional learning consistent with the State Board of Education standards, and it incentivizes collaborative relationships among community agencies and service coordination and early access, which are particularly critical for our commitment for systems coordination between education and health and human services. So thank you for the important question
and that's very good information, Director Snow. But again, if achievement gap was the motivation for changing the AEAs, why wasn't the achievement gap brought to the AEA's attention in the last 2 DE site visits to those AEAs?
I can't speak to the conversations and the directions that occurred before my tenure, but I can tell you that currently we have accreditation standards that are insufficiently focused on our shared goal of best serving students with disabilities, and these are the articulated ways in which we hope to be able to better ensure a meaningful accreditation process that supports accountability and continuous improvement across our entire special education system.
We do have a bunch of questions in the Q&A that I just don't think we're going to be able to get to. So I think we'll just do a couple of more public comment, but then I think what we'll do, Director Snow and Director Garcia, is combine those questions, kind of cipher through them and make them into a list that might be the same, and then send on your way to see if you want to respond to that and get those out to the public. If that's okay with you. Brandy Smith, I have you up next for public comment. Oh, and I actually see you.
Hello, thank you, Director Snow and Director Garcia for having us here tonight. My name is Brandy Smith, and I am an early childhood special education team representative. I'm also the president of the Iowa Association for the Education of Young Children. And I guess mine is just a true public comment. While I appreciate that early access and child find have been discussed, early childhood is very unique and that we're not always visible in the schools. My job is in the community partners and that true child find. Last week alone, there were 7 referrals that came through just in our little town that are not children in the public schools. My concern is that while this is while we know it's there and it's been recognized, please don't lose sight of early childhood. And Director Garcia, you asked about bringing Iowans to the table. Please make sure that there is someone that truly understands early access and early childhood in our state. And what we're looking at specifically when we're looking at children that are going across the Health and Human Services and the Department of Education sectors, when they are identified, I would love to have recommendations and considerations specifically for that age group. And while I know that's not specific to these bills, I don't want them, the littlest Iowans, to get lost in this bill.
That's
think
great
we
feedback.
have,
Thank you, Brady. Hey, Brooke.
yeah.
Someone direct messaged me that I am having a hard time keeping on track of everything, but Angela Ganson said that she was like maybe 7 people ahead of the current speaker, who was Brandy at the time.
Okay,
And I wondered if we could call on her.
absolutely.
Because she
I must have
messaged
missed
me
you.
and I was reading her
Oh,
message.
I see that. I'm so sorry, Angela.
No,
I do see
no,
that.
it's a lot to pay attention to. No apologies necessary. This is great feedback. It'll be a lot to sort through. But
Thank
Angela,
you, Kelly. Thank you, Kelly. Partly because I didn't get to speak when I was in Des Moines. I have been in education for 27 years. 25 of them have been in Iowa. 28 years of that has been teaching in Iowa classrooms. I was a special education teacher, a regular education teacher. I've been a curriculum director. I'm now the professional learning coordinator at Central Rivers AEA. On top of that, I have sat hours and hours and hours proctoring those exams that are leading all these conversations. And if you've never proctored an exam with someone who is not at grade level, I suggest you do that before you use that data to come at us. Secondly, instructional practices. One of the reasons that Lynn Evans, sorry, and others have claimed that we have to do something is that we're not consistent across the AEAs and that kids deserve better. I'm not sure what that percentage is across the state, but even Lynn Evans says the majority of the schools are going to choose the AEAs. And if the majority of the schools and families and AEAs are successful, shouldn't legislation be looking at, and even Director Snow, you're saying that the DE accreditation process is failed. And I think that's where we need to start. We can't fix things if people aren't saying that we need to fix things. The DE accreditation is not our fault. It is not the classroom teacher's fault. It is not the family's fault. But not giving us even a chance is just absolutely absurd. If the accreditation process was there, I would trust you that every single AEA person who hasn't slept for 2 months would fix it, because that's all we do is we fix. The schools call, we are right there, we fix. We would remedy those items and those assistant levels instead of just dumping a whole apple cart. It's just a recipe for a la carte. So I don't know how having every school district, which is going to be relative to how involved, how experienced, and how resourceful the superintendent is in each district, is still not closest to the kids. And right now, on top of that, which we just don't hear about, is that we have 5,500 special education teachers, the closest humans to our special ed kids, that are on conditional licenses. They're still trying to learn how to be classroom teachers for special ed students. They are not even fully licensed. They're the people the AEA teachers are supporting. They're not AEA teachers. The AEA people are the Band-Aids holding them together.
Thank you, Angela. I need to cut you off. Thank you.
I do realize that we didn't get to everybody's public comment. We have about 6 minutes left. I do want to end with letting Mackenzie Snow and Director Garcia make some final comments. And I think one of the things Director Snow and Director Garcia that we wanted to hear from is like kind of what are the next steps that you've been hearing the comments, and we still have some questions I think that maybe are unanswered from our advocates. And so kind of where do we go from here, knowing that possibly these bills might be coming up for debate relatively soon.
Thank you, Brooke. And just before we jump into that, I want to address 2 points that were brought up, and we're hoping we'll be able to loop back to. So again, thank you, Angela, for your feedback and for your comment. I just want to make sure that the clarification is made that the DE accreditation standards are based on what's currently existing in code. They are the current legislatively determined accreditation standards. And one of the cruxes of this conversation is to ensure that those accreditation standards are meaningful. We at the department implement what is in code, and we have identified throughout this conversation gaps in the focus on high quality special education services and supports and specially designed instruction and on in the accreditation standards. And then I also just want to loop back to one of the questions or comments around the Family Educator Partnership and FEP, and want to provide Dr. Guy the opportunity to provide some background. But the main takeaway again is that those services are not going away. Those services have been identified to be provided in a way that identifies a service provider that provides both the parent services, both the supervisory responsibility and the services and supports, which of course represents a conflict. So the intent is to ensure that a entity that's solely focused on supporting parents is able to continue to ensure those critical supports to families and educators. But I also want to provide Dr. Guy the opportunity to share additional background.
Thank you, Director Snow. Yes, just to clarify, the decision to not fund, to not continue the contract, or actually the grant funds to AEAs is the department's. I want to make that very clear. It's not about the bill. Governor was not involved in that conversation. It was an internal conversation. We at the department have been working with the department or with the AEA directors of special education for a number of years to try to improve the consistency of services. Federal, those folks do fabulous things as individuals, and they help families on a fairly small scale, but it is not consistent, has not been consistent statewide. And we've tried to, with the directors of special education and the AEAs, to do that. I also want to point out that while this is through the media, we have not, as the Department of Ed, made an official announcement around this. This was information that was put out for whatever reason from our partners and collaborators.
Thank you, Dr. Guy. And I know we just have a couple minutes left. So I want to address Brooke's incredibly important question of what are next steps. And I think obviously there's multiple legislative conversations currently ongoing. Conversations are ongoing, and regardless of ultimately what the General Assembly acts upon or does not act upon, we so appreciate the opportunity to have these open and direct lines of communication with so many experts across the state. So appreciate the DD Council's partnership and providing us access to you all and to facilitating this incredible and important conversation. And just want to ensure that regardless of next steps, that we continue to have this close communication. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
Dr. Garcia, did you have anything you wanted to end with?
Yes, I was still reading. I'm trying to read through all of the,
There's a lot.
the incredible comments. I know it's just, it's it's helpful. I think our commitment on the HHS side is to stay in close partnership, of course, with the Department of Education, but with each one of you. So we regularly interact with the DD Council. We do host monthly, by we, I mean Director Manny, host regular monthly town halls, and we're very soon, in the month of March, going to be launching child welfare related town halls. That may not affect a lot of y'all here, but certainly when we see youth with higher needs, it does. And a lot of those system changes in terms of access to services cut across the Medicaid space and into that space as well. It's super important to us as an agency that we hear from you on a regular basis. I have no desire to sit in my office and make these changes without you. And so just thank you again for the incredible contributions and the commitment to doing this together.
again. Sorry, I was on.
Oh, Brooke, you're still on mute.
I keep clicking on it. It's been a long evening. Thank you, Director Snow and Director Garcia, for being with us tonight, and for all the family members and teachers and educators that joined us too. We will send out this recording, and as I mentioned, we will try to capture all the questions that did not get answered and send them on to see if we cannot get some answers. And we hope that we'll have some continued discussions, as Director Snow and Garcia mentioned. So thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of your evening.